Okay, for the rest of the course, we're going to be exploring the Python programming language. And Python has been around for about 30 years. This is the homepage of the Python programming language. And I discovered Python about 20 years ago, and I came to it from a background of programming in a few other languages. And really, it was sort of a revelation when I first started programming in Python. It was really very, very nice to program in Python. And this is kind of summed up in this XKCD cartoon that was published a couple of years ago. In it, in case you are looking at this on a small screen, there's one guy looking at another guy who's saying, "You're flying, how?" And the guy says, "Python." And he then goes on to extol all the great things about Python and how easy it is. And in the text that comes up when you roll your mouse over the cartoon, it says, "I wrote 20 short programs in Python yesterday. It was wonderful. Perl, I'm leaving you." And certainly, initially, Python did a lot of the jobs that Perl did. Perl was a language that was used extensively for writing the back end of web scripts. And Perl is a very flexible language, but it is very hard to look at somebody else's Perl code. And one of the things in Python is that it should be very easy to read. It should be with a sort of an emphasis on readability and being able for you to understand it and for anybody else who's reading your code to understand it. So how do you program in Python? Well, there's a lot of different ways you can program in Python. There's a lot of different tools you can use. And I debated all of these tools and what to do for my students. You can simply use the terminal, whether you have a Mac or a PC or a Linux box. You can program in the terminal. You can a Python program is essentially just a text file, and Python will run on just about any computer, so you can just use the terminal if you like, but that's really not a very satisfying thing to do. So most people use some form of text editor or some form of integrated development environment. So for instance, you could use Sublime Text. It's a very popular text editor. It works with a lot of different languages. You can see down here, this is sort of the Python implementation. And what that does is it will color the code so that it's easier to see the different parts of the code, things that are important. But again, it's just a text editor really when it boils down to it. And so you're still going to be wanting to run the program. But a lot of people use Sublime. They're perfectly happy with Sublime. You can also use code editors like Microsoft's Visual Studio, which is free. And this one is actually very, very slick and very nice and sort of integrates both the editor part and the terminal part. And so you can use this as your complete editor, and a lot of professional programmers do just that. You can also, there are really hundreds of these sorts of environments. This is Pycharm. Pycharm is a very popular editor for both Python and for Java. Pycharm, obviously, with the PY is for Python, but the same company produces editors for Java. And this is a free version of Pycharm. It's the CE or Community Edition version. There is a paid version as well. But learning these integrated development environments is a sort of a step into of itself. It takes quite a while to sort of figure out how they work, and it is probably much more than you want to do right now. There are easier ways to learn the Python programming language before you get into worrying about an integrated development environment. There's one that I came across called Thonny, or Thonny, Thonny. It's actually developed in Finland by a computer science professor, and this is a much more sort of stripped down environment, and it is really ideal for helping you learn. It has a very nice built-in debugger, which is something that is crucial if you're learning to program a slightly bigger script or bigger program. You want to be able to debug it in a way that helps you understand what's going on. So this is another one that I considered using. But in the end, I'll show you one more thing you could do as well. You could also use a Jupyter Notebook. So Jupyter Notebooks are really growing in popularity. They actually started with a Python implementation, so they used to be just called Python Notebooks. But then they separated the language part, and now you can run a Jupyter Notebook in just about any language there is. And these are really popular among scientists, and especially data scientists. And It's not quite a full integrated development environment, and things work a little differently here, but it does have an awful lot of nice features. And so I considered using that. I also considered using just what you get when you download Python from the python.org website. So when you download Python, Python is actually probably already on most of your computers, but if it isn't, you can download it here for Mac, or you can download it here for Windows. And you will get a program called idle, I-D-L-E. You will notice that in the Python world, a lot of things refer to Monty Python. So idle probably stands for something, I'm not sure what, but it also refers to one of the Monty Python members, Eric Idle. And so if you go to idle, you will get two sort of ways to interact with Python. You can open a script, and you can edit a script and save a script and then run the script just by going up here to the Run menu. But you can also interact with the Python interpreter. And you can do the same sort of things here just at the terminal level by typing Python and then starting the Python interpreter. And that'll allow you to do test code. And this is actually one of the strengths of Python, that you can just test out little pieces of code to see how they work. And so again, idle is actually very, very nice. It's kind of stripped down. There's very little to worry about. You can get up and running very quickly. And I would recommend, if you want to play around with Python at home and you don't want to do what I'm going to do in class, you could certainly do this. And this would allow you to write interesting Python programs. In particular, if you're interested in doing things like Pygame, you will have to do something like this, because it won't work with what I want to do with you. Now, what I want to do is something very similar to a Jupyter Notebook. In fact, it is based on the Jupyter Notebooks, but it is offered through a free service of Google. It's a Google Colab notebook, and that has a lot of really nice things that will help us learn Python. And I will leave the introduction of the Google Colab until the next video. So watch the next video.